Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are unpacking a truly monumental and, well, maybe unexpected shift in cryptocurrency policy.
Yeah, definitely unexpected for some.
It's really reshaping the entire future of digital assets here in the U.S. We're talking about something far beyond just a minor tweak.
Oh yeah, this is a strategic reorientation, absolutely.
Think about it. Stable coins getting explicitly legalized, central bank digital currencies, CBDCs banned outright. And like for the first time ever, the federal government is actively building a strategic Bitcoin reserve.
A strategic Bitcoin reserve, it still sounds kind of sci-fi when you say it out loud.
Doesn't it? Yes, you heard that right. A strategic Bitcoin reserve.
It's a seismic shift, really. For so many years, the U.S. stance on crypto felt, well, ambiguous at best, right?
Often leaning towards open hostility or just, reactive enforcement actions.
Exactly. And what's truly remarkable now is the speed and the decisiveness with which this whole transformation is happening. It just signals a complete change in the philosophical approach.
That's right. So our mission today is to take a deep dive into this new regulatory framework. It's really materialized out of Washington in 2025, mostly driven by a series of new executive orders. We need to understand not just what's actually happening, but critically the why behind these, frankly, groundbreaking changes.
Yeah, the context is key.
Our goal, as always, is to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, those core insights, to make you thoroughly well-informed quickly without feeling overwhelmed by just the sheer volume of information.
And just to be clear for everyone listening, that this isn't simply speculation or, just punditry.
Oh, not at all.
This deep dive is grounded in a collection of very recent official reports, the executive orders themselves, and some detailed analyses that pinpoint precisely what's unfolding with this U.S. crypto comeback.
Right.
We've meticulously gone through the official documents, looked at the timelines of these legislative shifts, and synthesized expert commentary to guide our discussion today. It's really a data-driven look at this evolving landscape.
Okay, fantastic. So let's unpack this monumental shift. Where should we start? Maybe with the topic that's generated, well, intense debate and some pretty strong feelings across the board. The digital dollar.
Okay, so we're kicking things off with Executive Order 14178. This was signed into law back in January 2025, and it was nothing short of a bombshell for the financial world.
Oh, absolutely. A bombshell is the right word.
It explicitly bans the development and issuance of a U.S. central bank digital currency. So this means the digital dollar, at least, in its government-controlled form, is effectively dead on arrival.
Dead on arrival. It's a dramatic reversal.
Totally, especially from where things stood just a short while ago, right?
It is a complete 180, and the significance, honestly, can't be overstated. To really grasp why this is such a pivotal moment, maybe we should first clearly define what a CBDC actually is.
Good idea. Let's clarify that. Okay, so at its core, a CBDC is basically a government-issued digital dollar. Think of it as a digital form of fiat currency, like the dollar, but unlike the cash in your pocket or the numbers in your commercial bank account.
Which are liabilities of the commercial bank. Right?
Exactly. A CBDC would be issued and directly controlled by the Federal Reserve. It's a direct liability of the central bank itself.
Okay.
And it could potentially operate on, say, a permissioned blockchain or maybe just a closed, centralized system that the Fed manages directly. The key thing is that direct control.
And for a lot of people, that very concept of direct control sounded, well, frankly, terrifying. I remember a significant public outcry.
There was.
Given that the Federal Reserve was actively exploring it, what do you think was the tipping point? What swung policy so dramatically against the digital dollar, especially thinking about public perception?
That's a crucial question. The why behind this ban, it really comes down to an incredibly strong conviction around financial freedom and individual privacy. It's actually remarkable how quickly that whole narrative shifted. Because remember, just 18 months before this executive order, the Fed wasn't just exploring CBDCs, they were actively testing prototypes. They were even collaborating with big institutions like MIT on this.
Right. I remember reading about that. So there were arguments for it, too.
Oh, absolutely. There were proponents who argued for CBDCs. They talked about faster payments, maybe increasing financial inclusion for, unbanked populations, or even potentially fighting illicit finance more effectively by having greater visibility into transactions. They really saw it as just a modern evolution of money.
Okay, so those arguments were definitely out there, but they clearly didn't carry the day. What were the overriding concerns that led to this dramatic ban? What was the pushback really about?
The fears among the critics were incredibly profound, and they resonated widely. The core argument was that a CBDC could grant the government an unprecedented and potentially excessive level of control over our personal finances.
Right.
I mean, imagine the implications. Real-time monitoring of every single purchase, every transfer, every financial activity you engage in, your entire economic life, potentially just laid bare for government eyes.
Yeah, that surveillance aspect.
Exactly. While proponents might argue, oh, this helps combat crime, opponents countered that it creates an unparalleled surveillance state.
That's the part that really seemed to strike a chord with so many people. The idea that someone could literally watch every single transaction you make, it just feels inherently invasive, doesn't it? Like a chilling effect on individual liberty.
It does. And beyond just the surveillance piece, opponents raised even more alarming concerns. Things like the government's potential ability to freeze or reverse payments at will.
Okay, wow.
Unlike physical cash, which gives you anonymity and, untraceability, or even traditional bank accounts, which have certain legal protections.
Right. Due process and stuff.
Exactly. A centrally controlled digital currency could theoretically just be manipulated. And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. The potential for those kinds of powers is inherent in the very architecture of a centrally controlled digital currency. So it raises these profound questions about financial autonomy, due process.
And then there was that phrase that truly seemed to inflame the public discourse. Programmable restrictions. That sounded less like finance and more like something ripped straight out of a dystopian novel.
It absolutely did, and it became a flashpoint, and for good reason, I think. The idea was that a CBDC could potentially have these programmable restrictions coded directly into the digital currency itself.
So what does it actually mean, practically?
Well, it means the government could, in theory, dictate how, when, or even where your money could be spent.
Seriously?
Yeah. Imagine money that expires if you don't use it within a certain time frame. Or funds specifically earmarked only for approved goods or services, or even geographical spending limits, like you can only spend this money in this state.
Wow. Controlling doesn't even begin to cover it.
Right. The implications for individual autonomy, economic freedom, even the fundamental concept of fungible money, meaning $1 is the same as any other dollar, are just immense. This potential for control, for a government to dictate your spending habits, is precisely why opponents found the idea so utterly terrifying. They saw it as a direct threat to civil liberties.
Okay, so given all that pushback, Executive Order 14178 sounds like it directly confronts these fears. It lays out a very clear policy statement, right?
Indeed. The order is explicit. It states that the policy of the United States is to preserve the use of physical cash and prevent the surveillance and programmability capabilities of a CBDC.
Wow. That's definitive. No ambiguity there.
None. It signals an unequivocally bearish stance on government-issued digital currencies. But, and this is really the crucial insight, I think, this bearishness on CBDCs is fundamentally driven by a bullish conviction on protecting core American values, financial privacy, individual liberty, economic freedom.
So it's not anti-digital currency per se.
Exactly. It's anti-controlled digital currency.
Which means, in a kind of profound way, it's also a vote of confidence for something else entirely.
Precisely. This ban isn't just about saying no to government crypto. It signifies a really profound strategic shift towards saying a resounding yes to private innovation in the digital asset space.
Okay.
The U.S. is basically prioritizing a market-driven approach for the future of digital finance. This means fostering an environment where private companies can develop digital assets and services, without the government trying to control the currency itself.
So the deeper insight here isn't just no government crypto, yes private crypto.
Right. It's that the U.S. is strategically choosing to essentially externalize the innovation risk to the agile private sector. Let market forces drive development while the government retains the ultimate regulatory oversight.
That's interesting.
It's a calculated bet on market agility over centralized control. It's a very distinct approach compared to, say, China's highly centralized digital yuan model.
Yeah, okay. It's setting a very clear boundary then.
Yeah.
The government won't be your wallet, but it will help establish the rules for the wallets you can choose to use.
Well put.
Which brings us directly to the next monumental piece of this puzzle, which is all about reshaping that regulatory landscape. How do you actually create those rules? So Executive Order 14178 wasn't just a one-trick pony, was it? While it emphatically slammed the door shut on government-issued CBDCs,
Right.
it simultaneously opened another really crucial door, establishing the Crypto Regulatory Task Force. This feels like the essential counterbalance, right? Creating the guardrails for that private innovation we were just talking about.
It is absolutely the indispensable flip side of that coin. You can't really have one without the other if you want a functioning system.
Makes sense.
This task force, it's a new multi-agency body structured in a pretty unique way, and it's specifically tasked with creating a comprehensive and, importantly, cohesive framework for crypto innovation and oversight.
Okay. Cohesive being the key word there, maybe, compared to before.
Exactly. Its very formation is a stark departure from the previous approach, which was often fragmented, sometimes contradictory between agencies, and frequently reactive, right? Dealing with problems after they happen.
Yeah, regulation by enforcement, as people called it.
Precisely. This new task force signals a proactive rather than reactive stance.
So the purpose isn't just passive observation or even, like you said, punitive enforcement. It's about active construction, actually building a sustainable system for the future.
Precisely. Their overarching goal, as stated, is to write clear, enforceable, innovation-friendly rules for the whole vast spectrum of digital assets.
And that's not just stablecoins.
No, it goes far beyond just stablecoins. It includes things like utility tokens, tokenized securities, even the foundational blockchain infrastructure itself.
Wow.
And that emphasis on innovation-friendly is absolutely crucial here.
Why is that so important?
Because it marks such a significant and undeniable shift from what was widely described, maybe fairly, maybe unfairly, as a crypto-hostile tone that often came from regulators in the past.
Right. Under previous leadership, maybe?
The focus now, fundamentally, seems to be on partnership and enabling compliant growth, rather than punishment and stifling innovation. This new approach seems to understand that clear rules, even if they're stringent, are actually preferable to regulatory ambiguity, which just paralyzes everyone.
That's got to be a huge psychological and operational shift for the industry, wouldn't you say? Going from feeling like they were constantly being targeted or prosecuted to now being explicitly invited to the table.
Huge.
But, for those in the industry who felt burned before, is there maybe a risk this partnership could still feel like being brought to the table, but on their terms, the government's terms? How are they navigating that dynamic?
That's a very astute observation, and it's definitely a dynamic the industry is navigating carefully. However, the actual membership of this task force is truly noteworthy, and I think it helps mitigate some of those concerns. Well, it includes the key regulatory bodies, right?
Right.
The SEC, for instance, is now operating under entirely new leadership. And this new leadership has demonstrably reversed its previously hostile approach.
Demonstrably.
We're talking about the formal withdrawal of over a dozen anti-crypto proposals from what was known as the Gary Gensler era.
A dozen.
Yeah. And these weren't minor tweaks. They included things like really broad definitions that could classify almost any token as a security, aggressive enforcement actions, attempts to expand SEC jurisdiction into areas that were previously unregulated. Their withdrawal is an undeniable signal of a major policy pivot.
Wow. Withdrawing a dozen proposals. That is an incredibly clear and powerful signal that something fundamentally different is happening. That's not just talk.
It unequivocally is. And beyond the SEC, you've got the CFTC, which traditionally oversees commodities, and the Treasury Department, responsible for the financial systems. They're also integral members. But what genuinely distinguishes this task force, and kind of addresses your point about industry buy-in, is the crucial and mandated representation from private sector innovators.
So they have to be there.
They have to be there. Leading firms like Coinbase, Circle, PayPal, they're now working directly, hands-on, with these regulators to collaboratively build compliant offerings.
That's amazing.
This direct collaborative engagement, which honestly was almost unimaginable just a few years ago, is fundamental to this new partnership approach. And it aims to ensure that the rules being written are practical, they're implementable, and they actually foster rather than hinder innovation. It's a deliberate effort to co-create the future rather than just have it imposed from above.
So it's not just the government dictating rules from some ivory tower anymore. It's meant to be a dynamic conversation, maybe even a genuine negotiation. Are we seeing any tangible, immediate outcomes from this unprecedented collaboration?
Yeah.
What's the impact been in terms of actual legislative progress so far?
We are seeing tangible results, and pretty quickly, too. One immediate and highly significant outcome is the fast-tracking of the Genesis Act.
The Genesis Act, what's that?
It's a landmark piece of legislation specifically designed to regulate stablecoins.
Okay. Big focus there.
Huge focus. Its fast tracking indicates a clear and urgent governmental effort to bring clarity and a robust structure to this particular asset class. Many experts view stablecoins as a crucial bridge, right, between traditional finance and the broader crypto world.
Yeah, they seem foundational.
They are. So establishing clear rules for them is clearly a top priority.
And the Genesis Act being fast-tracked, that implies both urgency and maybe a shared vision across the different stakeholders.
Yeah.
Is not getting bogged down in bureaucratic infighting or inertia.
Exactly. That seems to be the case. This collaborative approach, combined with the promise of genuinely clear rules, is really designed to generate unprecedented confidence for businesses and investors alike. Well, instead of operating in that nebulous gray area where a new lawsuit or some enforcement action could just emerge at any moment.
Right, the uncertainty.
Companies now have a much clearer, more predictable path for building, scaling, and integrating digital asset services. This regulatory clarity, it's like a powerful magnet for both capital and top-tier talent.
Makes sense.
It means significant institutional players who were previously hesitant now have the framework they need to allocate substantial resources. The real shift might be that Washington isn't just reacting to crypto anymore. They seem to be actively designing its on-ramps into the existing financial system.
Designing the on-ramps. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, it signals a long-term strategy of integration over isolation. And that's a stark contrast to other major economic blocks that are still kind of grappling with how to even classify these assets, let alone regulate them effectively.
So when we look at this new framework, especially concerning altcoins and the whole regulatory environment, how would you characterize the overall stance? Bullish, bearish, neutral? What's the vibe?
I'd say this new framework is overwhelmingly bullish for achieving regulatory clarity. That's the main thing.
Okay.
And for specific altcoins, and here it's important to distinguish, right? We're talking things like stablecoins, certain utility tokens, and particularly tokenized securities. It's also highly bullish for their integration into the mainstream financial system, provided they do it through compliant offerings.
Right. Compliance is key.
Absolutely. The U.S. is definitively signaling that these assets have a legitimate place within its financial architecture as long as they adhere to these established yet hopefully innovation-friendly rules. It's about bringing them into America's terms, as one source put it.
Into America's terms, okay.
Which implies a structured, integrated future rather than, outright prohibition or just total laissez-faire chaos. It's an approach focused on harnessing the potential of these assets while mitigating the risks, rather than just trying to suppress them entirely.
It's about building bridges, not burning them, but doing so with a clear architectural plan.
Exactly.
And speaking of building, let's talk about something that genuinely feels like it's straight out of a science fiction movie, but is now very real and unfolding right before our eyes. Okay, so if the CBDC ban was a shockwave that reverberated globally, and the regulatory task force was this careful, calculated construction, then this next development, officially announced back in March 2025, is truly mind-blowing. We're talking about an executive order establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like something from a cyberpunk novel, doesn't it? But it's undeniably real.
It is genuinely unprecedented, and it represents just a profound philosophical shift. This move fundamentally repositions Bitcoin. It's not just a speculative digital novelty anymore. It's being treated as a legitimate asset class, explicitly placing it right alongside gold in terms of national strategic importance.
Wow, alongside gold.
Yeah. This isn't just some casual nod to cryptocurrency. It's a deep institutional recognition of Bitcoin's unique value proposition, but at a national strategic level. It's akin to how nations historically accumulated precious metals.
Like Fort Knox, but digital. That's a powerful analogy, isn't it?
It is.
What's the actual stated purpose of this reserve? Why is the U.S. government suddenly, explicitly deciding to start, stacking sats, as the community would say?
Well, the executive order outlines 3 clear and I think interconnected purposes for this strategic reserve.
Okay, what are they?
First, it's designed to store seized Bitcoin from criminal investigations.
Ah, okay. That makes sense. They seize a lot of it.
They do. For years, the government, primarily through agencies like the DOJ, has been accumulating substantial amounts of Bitcoin from operations targeting illicit activities like the Silk Road Marketplace,
Yeah, the famous.
Instead of just holding it temporarily and auctioning it off, it will now be permanently retained in this reserve.
Okay, that's one. What else?
Second, the reserve aims to potentially stabilize national crypto markets if needed.
Whoa, okay. How would that work?
Well, it gives the government a potential, albeit maybe controversial, lever to deploy in times of extreme volatility or market instability. They could potentially act as a kind of digital lender of last resort if they deemed it necessary.
Controversial indeed. And the third purpose?
And third, and perhaps most strategically significant, it's intended to act as a long-term strategic asset. And it's explicitly likened to how gold was historically held in Fort Knox as a foundational reserve asset underpinning national wealth and stability.
So it's not just about what they will do with future Bitcoin seizures, but how they're handling the massive amounts they already have. Because I definitely remember hearing about the government auctioning off huge amounts of seized crypto from those early days. Is that still happening?
No, and that's a crucial policy reversal. The U.S. government already holds a staggering amount of Bitcoin. The current estimates are over 200,000 BTC seized from operations like Silk Road, the Bitfinex hack, various other criminal enterprises.
200,000 Bitcoin. That's a lot.
It's a huge amount. And previously, yes, the prevailing policy was indeed to auction most of this seized Bitcoin off at regular intervals, basically converting it back to fiat currency.
Right.
However, under this new executive order, that policy is entirely reversed. Now, this seized BTC will be moved into multi-signature cold wallets managed by a Treasury-appointed custodian.
Okay, can you break down multi-signature cold wallets for us?
Sure. Think of them as highly secure offline digital vaults. Cold means not connected to the internet, making them extremely hard to hack. Multi-signature means it requires multiple separate cryptographic keys, think unique digital passwords, for anyone to access or move the Bitcoin.
So no single person can just move it.
Exactly. No single person or entity can move the Bitcoin unilaterally. It requires a consensus of multiple key holders. This ensures extreme security and prevents any single point of failure or, illicit movement.
Got it. Super secure.
And crucially, these substantial holdings will not be sold off without specific, explicit congressional approval.
Congressional approval, not just Treasury or DOJ.
Congressional approval, that is a massive barrier to liquidation.
Wow. Not sold off without congressional approval.
Yeah.
That's a huge legislative hurdle, isn't it? It effectively locks it away for the long term. So this Bitcoin isn't just passively sitting there, it's being intentionally held as a strategic asset, almost like a form of digital national wealth.
Exactly. And this profound shift in handling the seized Bitcoin, it signals two incredibly critical insights, I think.
Okay.
First, it means that the U.S. government recognizes Bitcoin as a store of value. Plain and simple.
That's a big statement.
Huge. It's not a mere digital curiosity or just a speculative play anymore in their eyes. It's seen as a valuable, durable asset, a legitimate form of national wealth accumulation, much like physical gold or foreign currency reserves. It's a fundamental maturation in perception from the government level.
Okay, that's the first insight. What's the second?
Second, and equally important, it highlights an intent to not lose strategic leverage over it. Meaning, they are keenly aware that other forward-thinking countries think El Salvador with its national Bitcoin treasury, or maybe the UAE with its strategic investments in digital assets, are actively stacking BTC on purpose.
Right. They see the long-term potential.
These nations are recognizing Bitcoin's long-term strategic importance in a rapidly digitizing global economy. So the U.S. already has this massive existing holding, and the new policy is essentially saying, wait a minute, let's not dump our digital gold, let's protect it and use it as a strategic anchor. This ensures the U.S. remains a significant player in the digital financial landscape, rather than just liquidating its position and potentially losing influence.
Let's not dump our digital gold, let's protect it. That's a really powerful statement, isn't it? And it truly underscores a clear bullish conviction on Bitcoin itself.
It absolutely does. This policy demonstrates an unambiguous, clear, bullish conviction in Bitcoin's long-term value and its strategic importance, both on a national and potentially even a global scale. It's a bold, proactive move that firmly aligns the U.S. with a forward-thinking approach to digital assets, recognizing Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset, much like gold. It's really an embrace of Bitcoin as a foundational element of future finance, not this ongoing battle against it that we saw sometimes in the past.
So it positions the U.S. not just as a regulator, but as a direct participant and holder in this burgeoning digital asset economy. Okay, so we've got the explicit CBDC ban favoring private innovation. We've got the new regulatory task force creating a structured pathway for altcoins. and now this unprecedented strategic Bitcoin reserve. How do all these distinct pieces fit together into the broader global landscape? What are the wider implications of this massive policy pivot for the whole crypto ecosystem and that global competition for dominance in the future of finance?
All right, so we've dissected the individual shifts, the definitive no to CBDCs, the newfound regulatory clarity, hopefully for altcoins, and that absolutely unprecedented strategic Bitcoin reserve. Now let's zoom out a bit. What do these integrated policies collectively mean for the broader crypto ecosystem, especially when you think about that intense global competition for dominance and the future of finance that everyone talks about?
Yeah, that global context is absolutely critical. This U.S. policy shift, it's definitely not occurring in a vacuum. It feels like a very meticulously calculated strategic move within a much larger and increasingly competitive global game. Well, for years, the profound regulatory uncertainty and, let's be honest, often outright hostility within the U.S. disproportionately drove innovation, capital, and frankly, top talent overseas.
Right. We saw that happen. Places like Singapore, Dubai.
Exactly. Countries like Singapore, the UAE, even some emerging European hubs, they became undeniable hotspots for crypto development and regulatory clarity. They were actively courting companies that felt unwelcome or just uncertain in the U.S.
Okay.
Now, it seems the U.S. is aggressively and purposefully reclaiming its position. It's signaling its intent to lead this space rather than lag behind.
So this isn't just about domestic policy then. It's a clear move on the global chessboard, explicitly aimed at regaining competitiveness.
Precisely. And there are several profound, anticipated positive outcomes for the U.S. ecosystem that will inevitably ripple globally. Firstly, and we keep coming back to this, but it's paramount, regulatory clarity.
The foundation.
Clear, predictable rules build immense confidence for businesses, for investors, for everyone. When companies know precisely what boundaries they're operating within, what technologies are permissible, how assets will be classified,
They can actually plan.
they can confidently invest significant capital, they can allocate talent, they can innovate aggressively, and grow without that constant paralyzing fear of sudden regulatory crackdowns or arbitrary shifts in policy.
Yeah.
The formal withdrawal of those old hostile proposals, the new SEC leadership embracing innovation, these are critical enablers of this newfound certainty. It means long-term planning actually becomes feasible again for U.S.-based projects.
That's a huge psychological and financial incentive, for sure. Uncertainty, like you said, is just kryptonite for significant investment and sustained development.
What about institutional adoption? We've heard for years about mainstream finance getting into crypto, but it often felt hesitant, right? Like dipping a toe in rather than diving headfirst. Yeah, and that hesitation, which was largely born of that regulatory ambiguity and the fear of being on the wrong side of an enforcement action, is now significantly diminished. Maybe not entirely gone, but significantly reduced. Major financial institutions now possess, essentially, the regulatory green light to integrate cryptocurrency services into their core operations.
So we're talking big banks, payment processors.
Yeah. This isn't just about small, agile crypto startups anymore. We are seeing established banks, major payment processors, massive investment firms, asset managers. They're rapidly developing comprehensive crypto offerings.
Like what specifically?
Things like integrating Bitcoin spot ETFs, launching stablecoin payment rails, exploring tokenized assets like bonds or real estate on-chain, building secure custody solutions for institutional clients. They're no longer just dabbling. They're committing substantial resources, serious talent, and real executive buy-in because that regulatory path is now clearer. And this means crypto services will likely become exponentially more accessible and deeply integrated into our daily financial lives, moving beyond just the niche crypto exchanges into the established financial behemoths that people already use.
And what about that brain drain we saw for so long? All those builders, developers, innovators who left the U.S. because it was simply too difficult, too uncertain, or maybe too hostile to operate here. Is this policy shift actually bringing them back?
That's a truly crucial point for American competitiveness and, frankly, technological leadership. The reports and analyses we looked at strongly suggest that builders returning from overseas and a significant influx of institutional capital flowing back into the U.S. are direct, measurable consequences of this sweeping policy reversal.
What's actually happening?
It appears to be. It's a definitive reversal of that regulatory exile that really characterized the prior years, where top talent and innovative projects just migrated to more welcoming jurisdictions.
Right.
The U.S. isn't simply seeking to participate in the crypto economy anymore. It seems it explicitly seeks to become a global leader in responsible crypto development.
Responsible development.
Yeah, which means actively attracting and retaining top-tier talent, fostering domestic innovation, and trying to ensure that future breakthroughs in digital finance happen on American shores. It's about cementing its economic and technological leadership for the decades to come. This isn't just about rejoining the race, it really feels like an attempt to lead it again.
So we're not just playing catch-up anymore. The ambition is clearly to lead, to set the global standard, perhaps.
That seems to be precisely the ambition, and the strategy feels multifaceted. While countries like Singapore and the UAE have undeniably led in certain aspects of crypto innovation and regulatory clarity in recent years.
Yeah, they got a head start in some ways.
They did. But the U.S. is now rapidly closing the gap with its new pro-innovation stance. And it's not just about setting rules, it's about leveraging its unparalleled existing financial infrastructure, right? The depth of its capital markets, its robust legal system, its historical role as a global financial leader, using all that to reestablish itself at the absolute forefront of digital finance.
Okay.
It feels like a declarative statement that the U.S. intends to be the primary architect of the future digital economy, shaping the standards and driving the adoption of compliant, secure, and innovative digital assets globally.
It sounds like an incredibly strong, clearly bullish stance for U.S. competitiveness in this whole arena. But, whenever there's a shift this significant, this foundational, there are always different perspectives, aren't there? Different interpretations. Is everyone unequivocally on board with this vision of a U.S. crypto comeback? Are there critics? So after meticulously analyzing everything we've discussed today, the CBDC ban, the newly empowered regulatory task force, and that truly historic strategic Bitcoin reserve, it really all culminates in one central critical question, doesn't it?
It does.
Does this comprehensive U.S. crypto comeback truly represent a genuine crypto renaissance, like a new era of growth and innovation? Or is it, as some skeptics are arguing, merely a power grab wrapped in digital gold?
It's indeed the ultimate question, isn't it? And it's a deeply complex one. There are compelling, valid arguments on both sides of that.
Okay.
While there seems to be a broad consensus that this whole suite of policies represents a major step forward compared to, say, the chaos of 2021 to 2023, where uncertainty just reigned and regulatory actions felt kind of arbitrary.
Yeah, it was messy.
It was messy. It's absolutely crucial to acknowledge that it's not perfect. There are significant nuances, there are inherent trade-offs, and there are legitimate criticisms that demand our attention. This isn't a black and white picture. It's full of shades of gray.
Okay, let's start by maybe elaborating on the optimistic view first, the crypto renaissance perspective. What are the key arguments proponents are putting forward to support that vision?
Right. So from the optimistic perspective, these new policies are seen as overwhelmingly bullish for the entire ecosystem. Firstly, the establishment of clear, well-defined regulations is viewed as the absolute bedrock, the foundation needed for genuine mainstream adoption. This means, theoretically, the onboarding of more institutional money, greater confidence for retail users, and just an overall increase in trust and legitimacy for the entire crypto space. It's about transforming the Wild West into more of an established frontier, right? Providing that regulatory certainty that businesses desperately need to build, innovate, and grow responsibly. It's about bringing, adult supervision, adult money into a maturing market.
So less chaos, more established infrastructure. That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a powerful incentive.
Exactly. Secondly, the government's explicit Bitcoin holdings. Optimists view that as an incredibly powerful legitimizing force.
How so?
Well, when the U.S. government, the world's largest economy, formally recognizes Bitcoin as a strategic asset, actively holding it basically akin to gold, it fundamentally elevates cryptocurrency. It moves it from being just a niche technology or a speculative play to a recognized, valuable, and strategically important asset class on the global stage. That move alone could drive further institutional adoption, corporate treasury adoption, maybe even sovereign adoption globally. It's essentially stamping a seal of approval on Bitcoin's long-term viability.
And that public-private partnership aspect of the task force, that direct collaboration we talked about, that must be a huge positive for the optimists too, right?
Absolutely. That collaborative approach, where private sector innovators work directly hand in hand with regulators, is viewed as potentially the ideal model for balancing innovation with necessary consumer protection and financial stability.
The sweet spot.
Yeah, trying to find that sweet spot. It aims to create rules that are not only effective, but also practical and forward-looking, enabling technological progress while simultaneously safeguarding consumers and preventing illicit activity. The profound hope here is that this leads to practical, workable frameworks that actually foster rather than hinder the revolutionary potential of blockchain tech. And finally, the optimistic view confidently predicts that the U.S. could indeed become the undisputed global leader in responsible crypto development. By attracting top talent and capital, setting clear, rational standards, the U.S. wouldn't just shape the future of finance, but could also solidify its geopolitical influence in the digital age. They truly believe this is the definitive beginning of a crypto renaissance.
That paints a really compelling and, frankly, powerful vision for the future. But, of course, there's always the other side of the coin. What about the skeptical perspective? Those who view this as maybe more of a power grab wrapped in digital gold. What are their core concerns?
Right. The skeptical perspective raises several critical and I think well-argued points that really warrant careful consideration. One significant concern is that while the new regulations are indeed clearer, they may inherently favor large established institutions over smaller, more decentralized projects.
How would that happen?
Well, the argument suggests that the increasing regulatory burden, think about the potentially prohibitively high costs of legal compliance, the need for extensive reporting infrastructure for KYCML rules, the sheer complexity of navigating these new frameworks, it could make it incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible, for smaller, independent, or truly decentralized projects to compete or even survive.
Oh, okay.
This could inadvertently stifle the grassroots innovation and that sort of permissionless nature that characterized crypto's early days, potentially leading to a consolidation of power among the big players who can afford the compliance overhead.
So it could lead to a centralization of power within the crypto industry itself, not just an extension of government control, creating higher barriers to entry, essentially.
That's a key part of their argument, yes. Another major concern revolves around the government's massive Bitcoin reserve, while optimists see it as critical legitimization.
The skeptics see.
Skeptics worry intensely that the government's unprecedented Bitcoin holdings could lead to market manipulation.
Right, we touched on that earlier.
Yeah. The sheer volume of BTC held over 200,000 coins, which is a significant percentage of the total circulating supply, gives the U.S. government potentially significant influence over market dynamics.
How could they use that influence?
Well, this could be exploited, perhaps intentionally, through strategic sales during crises to stabilize markets, or maybe even unintentionally just through signaling effects. Either way, it could distort a market that ideally thrives on decentralization and open access. It raises serious questions about whether any single entity, even a government, should wield that much market power over a supposedly decentralized asset.
That's a very valid point. Any entity with that much financial power certainly has the potential to influence a market, whether they intend to or not.
For sure. Furthermore, skeptics argue forcefully that true decentralization might be fundamentally compromised by heavy oversight.
Even with the CBDC ban.
Yeah, even with the ban. While the CBDC ban does protect against direct government control of the currency itself, the extensive regulatory framework being built for private digital assets could still lead to a system where the core ethos of genuine decentralization, things like censorship resistance, permissionless innovation, community-governed protocols, gets fundamentally watered down by compliance requirements, centralized gatekeepers, data reporting mandates.
So the government isn't issuing the dollar, but it's still controlling the gates.
That's the argument. Controlling the gates to the digital economy. And finally, there's just the pervasive long-term uncertainty. Policy changes could be reversed by future administrations.
Oh, the political risk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This means that even these seemingly positive steps might not be permanent. A new administration, a different political climate, could easily pivot back to a more hostile stance, creating ongoing regulatory uncertainty that makes it incredibly difficult for the industry to plan and invest for the long haul. We've seen similar shifts in other tech sectors over the decades, right? Where regulatory stances evolve dramatically with political cycles.
Yeah, that's definitely a real risk. So we have these two very distinct, yet equally compelling lenses through which to view these monumental changes.
Yeah.
What are the overarching key themes that emerge across both perspectives? Like the areas everyone sort of agrees are happening, even if they interpret them differently?
Well, the central, undeniable themes are pretty clear, I think. First, the dramatic regulatory pivot itself, that's just a fact on the ground. Second, Bitcoin's elevated new strategic role that's explicitly codified in policy now. Third, the explicit and definitive rejection of CBDCs. That's a significant policy choice with major implications. And finally, an overarching deliberate focus on fostering private innovation, but doing it within a regulated framework. These are the undeniable facts of what has transpired. regardless of how you interpret their ultimate impacts.
Okay. Despite those differing views on the ultimate outcome, there must be some points of fundamental agreement, right? What do both the optimists and the skeptics actually acknowledge?
Absolutely. There's a clear universal consensus that the U.S. is officially back in the crypto game. Everyone, from the most ardent optimist to the deepest skeptic, seems to agree on that. The era of the U.S. being a regulatory laggard or maybe a hostile outlier seems to be over.
Okay, that's big.
And there's also an undeniable agreement that there's a significant, tangible shift towards real laws, real infrastructure, moving decisively beyond the previous ad hoc, often enforcement-driven or sometimes hostile approach. The era of regulatory chaos and ambiguity, for the most part, is widely considered to be drawing to a close, replaced by a more structured, even if it's still evolving, environment.
But it's really the points of disagreement where the real nuanced debate lies, isn't it? Where the future is still being actively shaped and contested.
Indeed. The core disagreements revolve precisely around the impact on true decentralization. Will this new system genuinely benefit smaller, truly decentralized projects, or will it inherently favor the larger, established players who can more easily absorb the compliance costs? There's also that contentious issue of whether the government's substantial Bitcoin holdings represent a true strategic asset for national benefit, or if they're a potential tool for problematic market manipulation, or even just subtle control. And finally, the long-term stability and permanence of these policies under future administrations remains a major, unresolved question mark, coloring basically every long-term investment decision in the space.
And it all seems to cycle back to that fundamental idea of financial freedom, doesn't it? The CBDC ban was explicitly framed as a move to protect it.
Right.
But the new oversight, from the skeptical viewpoint, might still centralize control in different, perhaps more subtle ways.
It absolutely does. The CBDC ban was a clear, unambiguous move intended to protect financial privacy and prevent government surveillance or programmable control over individual spending. It was definitely framed as a victory for a certain interpretation of financial freedom. But the skeptical view implicitly asks if the new oversight mechanisms for stablecoins, for other altcoins while bringing clarity, might still, maybe inadvertently or perhaps intentionally, centralize control points within the regulated entities themselves. Think exchanges, custodians, stablecoin issuers.
Okay.
This could potentially compromise aspects of financial freedom through different, more indirect means. For instance, through extensive data collection by these regulated intermediaries, or by creating a kind of de facto oligopoly of compliant players that makes it hard for alternatives to emerge. It's a really nuanced debate about where the lines of control and individual freedom ultimately fall in this new digitized, regulated financial system.
Fascinating. It genuinely feels like we are witnessing the very early stages of a completely new era unfold right before our eyes. It's complex.
Wow.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we really leave you, the listener, with the very question that is at the heart of this entire profound shift. Do you think this is the definitive beginning of a genuine crypto renaissance, bringing unprecedented legitimacy and innovation? Or is it, as the skeptics contend, just another form of a power grab, maybe meticulously wrapped in digital gold, designed ultimately to bring a wild new frontier under centralized control?
The coming years undoubtedly will provide the answers. They'll determine whether this new, bold approach can truly maintain that incredibly delicate, maybe elusive balance between rigorous regulation and unfettered innovation, a balance that has historically eluded policymakers in this complex, rapidly evolving space. It really is a grand experiment, and the entire world is watching the outcome.
Love it or hate it, one thing is abundantly clear, and perhaps the most insightful comment from our sources encapsulates it perfectly. The U.S. is officially, definitively, and strategically back in the crypto game.
No doubt about that.
And this time, it's coming in not with ad hoc enforcement, but with real laws, real infrastructure, and a deliberate strategy that actually includes Bitcoin, rather than perpetually battling against it.